Hello, everybody. This is Dave Weinstein. I'm the president of El Cerrito Trail Trekkers. I welcome you to our first ever virtual Hillside Festival. We have several other events coming up, including a great bird virtual hike tomorrow with Howdy Goudey, an experienced naturalist. Wade Huntley and I will be talking about the history of the Hillside area, things that happened there and things that failed to happen. That'll be coming right up. When is it? Next Friday. I'd like you all to consider getting a copy of our map, which you can do either by joining Trekkers, go to our website, click on join, and join, or by going to several bookstores, including Builders Bookstores in Berkeley, Pegasus on Salina Avenue, and Jenny K's right here in El Cerrito. Okay, well, we are going to learn about how to get rid of one of the more dangerous plants in the hillside, broom. Our speaker today is Howdy Goudey, who's been a member of the El Cerrito Environmental Quality Committee for more than 10 years. He's a volunteer at Trekker events, EQC events with the Jim McKissick Hillside Naturalist Group. He's been working to restore and steward natural environments here in town for a long time. He works at Berkeley Lab on energy efficiency for buildings, and he also has worked with local community gardening groups. So Howdy, at this point, why don't you tell us sweeping away the broom?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Welcome everyone. And I just want to share with you some of, my experience working in the El Cerrito natural areas and involving a lot of broom removal, but also some other native plant stewardship. And I'm by no means an expert. I just am going to share what I've picked up along the way and welcome others' information as well. So here we go. We'll begin with the European tour of broom. So one of the first questions that often comes up is that Scotch broom or French broom? And I've heard of Scotch broom for a long time, and I wasn't as familiar with French broom. But as soon as I started pulling broom in the immediate, Bay Area, it was quickly pointed out to me that nearly all the broom we have is French broom, and so there are, in fact, a couple more common European origin brooms that I didn't know about before this presentation. There's Spanish broom and Portuguese broom too, but for our local purposes, we have French broom. So, and this is an introduced species that has been here probably more than 150 years at this point, and it's initially been it was considered an ornamental. It is pretty, as you can see. Well, this happens to be a picture of Scotch broom instead of French broom, but they both have abundant yellow flowers. So they were favored aesthetically, and they do pretty well on low water, and those all seem like desirable things until you realize that all those yellow flowers make an abundance of seeds and spreads themselves real well. And if it doesn't need a lot of water, it also is going to grow well on its own, and that means it's escaped its sort of ornamental garden beginnings in the state and really swept over a huge area. It's now estimated 100,000 acres in California of just French broom, not even the other varieties. So there was unfortunate practices in the past that even Caltrans would use it and plant it alongside of roadsides. I think it was thought to be attractive, and it stabilized slopes that they had just cut and things like that. But it's really turned out to be quite a problem, as we'll get into. And luckily, I think Caltrans has changed their practices, but you'll still see a lot of broom along roadsides. One of the areas where I see a lot near us is just going over the bridge to San Rafael on 580. There's a lot of broom just after you get off the bridge along the road there. And there are nurseries still selling broom, so definitely spread the word that people shouldn't be planting it. Even the supposedly sterile sweet broom variety has been found to hybridize with French broom and still contribute to the invasive spread problem. So what's the problem with all this broom? I mean, you know, sometimes we choose to control invasive plants just because they're spreading so much and taking over a lot of habitat, but broom has, you know, additional concerns. One of the primary ones is the fire hazard, which is a very keen concern these days, and that's because it produces a lot of dry biomass and standing dry biomass, so it doesn't tend to fall when it dies. These broom shrubs can grow up to 10 to 15 feet tall. They're really quite large. They put on quite a bit of woody mass. You can get branches and trunks that are, you know, several inches in diameter. So as you can see from the couple images there where we've pulled a lot of broom and piled it for green waste composting, that's a huge amount of, you know, dry biomass that's being removed from the hillside area, and that's all being done with volunteers. And, you know, we actually have to haul it to the road sometimes for the city to pick it up. They do give us dumpsters and things that are collected for the compost, but you know, it's a lot of labor to pull it, and then not just pull it but remove it, because when you have a lot of biomass, you are going to have a lot of dry material, and we're trying to reduce the fire hazard associated with this invasive plant. So as I mentioned before, it has really prolific seed production. You know, estimated like 20,000 seedlings per plant. Now, most of those don't make it. They have a pretty high attrition rate, but when you have that many tries, you're going to have success. And you know, one of the very humbling things when you endeavor to pull broom is, you know, you can encounter a very well-established stand of these 10 to 15 foot plants, and it can be very satisfying to pull them because, you know, as I'll show you, we have these great tools to make it easier, and you can pull one and get a lot of area cleared in a relatively short time. But those stands have been dropping seeds for years, and the seeds are very well protected. They have a hard seed coat, and they will persist for years. And so if you clear an area of big mature broom, you know, the next year you're going to see carpets of little seedlings, and that's a whole different problem to manage. But, you know, you can see on the pictures on the right what, you know, these very dense arrays of new seedlings can look like, and why they're there is because of all the seed pod production on the plant in the lower right corner. That's all those little fuzzy hairy pods that are a bit like a pea pod are containing, you know, hundreds and thousands of seeds. So it's definitely a challenge to control because of that seed production, and you know, it makes it very important to get the broom out before it goes to seed each year. And then just one other impact that I'll mention is, you know, there is a what's called the Genista broom moss. Genista is the genus of the broom plant, the French broom anyway. And so that moth, has caterpillars that will feed on the broom, which sounds like a good thing. It's actually kind of going to keep the broom under control, maybe. But it turns out it's not really doing that. It's just giving more habitat to this caterpillar and moth, more food for it, which makes it a bigger population that can have adverse impacts on the native lupin, which are fairly, stressed already in that they don't have a lot of habitat, and they're competing with all kinds of other invasive, annual grasses and things like that. And so it's just challenging when you have a host plant that can dramatically increase the population and then spread out to other hosts like the lupin that we'd like to see do better. So I want to recognize all the great effort that's been going on in the city for many years and surrounding areas to control broom. It's really quite a widespread activity. I mean, there's groups in Marin County and the East Bay Regional Parks all over the place, but just focusing sort of more locally here in El Cerrito. I mean, El Cerrito is kind of unique and lucky to have a 100-acre natural area entirely within the city limits, the Hillside Natural Area, which is why we're celebrating the Hillside Festival, because it's such a unique and valuable resource to have in our city. And, as a result, we have a number of local groups that have really stepped up to do volunteer stewardship in the Hillside Natural Area. And El Cerrito Trail Trekkers, who's organizing the Hillside Festival, is certainly one of those who's, in addition to building and maintaining trails, has done a lot of broom control along those trails and organized, broom pulling parties. So I certainly want to recognize El Cerrito Trail Trekkers for all their broom efforts. And then Friends of Five Creeks has also been very active. They're really focused on creek restoration and stewardship, but they've hosted a lot of broom pulls and done events in the Hillside Natural Area for many years as well. And so we certainly recognize their efforts. And then, as Dave said, I've been volunteering with both of those groups, but also I'm, as a member of the El Cerrito Environmental Quality Committee, we have something called Green Teams. Dave Weinstein of Trail Trekkers has also been very instrumental in Green Teams organization. There's a lot of overlap and coordination between our events, but the EQC, Green Teams, and the city of El Cerrito have also done a lot to support broom pull events, including the annual El Cerrito Earth Day work parties, and we've also, Trail Trekkers has gotten local Boy Scout and Cub Scout groups involved, and just recently we've had a couple work parties with them, and they're very enthusiastic and did a lot of great work with us. And then I also mentioned Jim McKissick, who's been a long-standing environmental stewardship leader in El Cerrito and other surrounding communities. And I just have to point out his great literal brooms that he made from French broom that was harvested in the Hillside Natural Area. So you can make a useful broom out of it. So I mentioned tools, and as we said, the broom grows from a small seedling up to this 10 or 15 foot quite substantial shrub, and the trunk can get around 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Most are probably in the 1 inch range or a little less. But there is a tool that's actually used for a lot of other invasive plant control besides just broom, but it works great on broom, and it's called the weed wrench. And there's a number of manufacturers and slight variations on the design. But the general premise is, it's a gripping clamp at the base of the plant that as you pull a lever back, you want a long lever, it sort of closes the jaws, pinches the stem of the plant to grip it hard, and then it levers against a base on the soil that allows you to sort of rotate the plant out of the ground using a lot of leverage, and the leverage is definitely your friend. So these wrenches are available in a lot of lengths. The bars might be anywhere from 2 feet to like 6 feet long, and vary in weight as a result. I mean, it's no small thing to carry these really big wrenches around, but to get the big plants, you really need that leverage, and it's worth it. It really goes quickly and easily. So all the groups I mentioned have these tools, and provide them to volunteers to help get the job done. And it really is an essential tool, although soil moisture makes a big difference. So a lot of broom pull activity is during the wetter times of the year, from late fall and early spring is the easy time of the year to be doing it, because we've had recent rains and the soil's nice and moist. Broom has a pretty long taproot. The photo in this image here is a little hard to read, but it's just a maybe 2 to 3 foot long, pretty slender little start, but you can see where the fingers are is kind of where the soil would be. So like a good third of that plant is in the ground, even at that small stage where the stem is probably, less than 1/4 of an inch, it's got about 1 foot into the ground. And you really want to get the root out. You don't want to just cut these off at the surface of the ground, because they will resprout. And that's why we use the weed wrenches to give us that leverage to pull out the root. Or if the soil's moist and it's a small young plant, you can actually pull these by hand pretty effectively, and it's not that hard of work. And so it's worth doing that on the size that you can do it. But you definitely don't want to cut them off, because that just makes things harder in the future. The way they grow back, it's a little bushier, and then you don't have a nice straight stalk at the base that you can grab with the tool. So it makes it a lot harder in the future. And we've encountered areas where that's happened, and it's just, it's much more work for everybody. So just whether you can pull it by hand or with the wrench, pull it and try to make sure you're getting the root out. That's essential. So there's other, tools when you're working outside that you want to always remember to have: gloves, hat, water, sunscreen, all that's important. It's also important to remember, the environment you're working in. It's a little off trail sometimes, it's a little more wild, and these broom stands are pretty dense and tend to be pretty uniform, and in that they're all broom, but you want to look out for other plants that are in there, partly because some of them we want to protect and save, but also because some of them are like poison oak, which will give you a really bad rash. And I've certainly experienced a couple cases of bad poison oak. So you want to be able to identify it, avoid it, and there's other things like ticks to be aware of, and then I mentioned these tools. They're long metal bars, they're heavy, people are pulling pretty hard on them, so you want to be aware of where people are working and stay out of the accidental zone of impact of other people pulling broom, because you can get hurt. So this is just all a few reminders and tips of how we do this safely. So now I have a series of videos, and this first one is just kind of a look at using a broom wrench, and it's a little bit repetitive. I apologize if sometimes it gets a little wild, but you can see the grip on the base, and then it's just rotating it back, and it pulled the root clump out. In that case, a bit of soil came out, because on those bigger plants, even though it's a taproot, it does branch out a bit, and it can pull. You can see quite a decent root mass there, but at least we got all the roots out with that plant, and that was possible because of the broom wrench. And so this is just going to show over a few different plants coming out, but you can also kind of get a sense of the pace of how rapidly you can do this. I mean, you can take out several good-sized broom in under a minute. So this is a very efficient and effective way to remove and get a big improvement in an area fairly quickly. I mean, at these work parties, we might have anywhere from 6 to 15 or 20 people, and when you have that many people working together, you can make a lot of progress really quickly. There you can see, sometimes you pull, the handle gets kind of close to the ground, and you sort of run out of room to pull, so you have to kind of reset the jaw, make sure it's biting good and close to the ground, and that it gives you the leverage out, but you eventually get it out. And then that was a really big one. It has a nice big root mass on it, but that came out relatively easily too. So this is this is the life of a broom puller. You're just going from plant to plant, and obviously, like I said, these large stalks are relatively straightforward and fast to get, especially with the broom wrench. I mean, the broom wrench adds a little bit of effort in terms of setting it and getting it in position, but it just gives you so much mechanical advantage that it's really worth it to get the large ones. But you can see around those large ones, there's a lot of small stuff coming up, and that's really important to get too. Although I will mention that for the first 2 or 3 years, the broom does not set seed. So that's a little bit of a mercy in that you have some time to get out new seedlings before they're making the situation worse. And that's why you want to focus on the big stuff and the stuff that's going to set seed. So this one that I'm working on here, you can see that doesn't have any green leaf material on it, but it was a standing dead plant. And so that I just want to reiterate as an important thing from the fire hazard standpoint, that standing dry fuel is a lot more hazardous than fuel on the ground. Now the white flower you see on that little vine at the base of this, I'm trying to protect it. That's actually a California native blackberry, and you can distinguish it from the Himalayan blackberry because it has much smaller spines and they're distributed around the stem instead of kind of flat arrays. But that's one of the things you want to watch out for, is as you're pulling the broom, there's desirable plants mixed in, and you don't want to do any more harm than you have to in getting the broom out. So I'm pulling that large plant and then trying to make it a better habitat for that native blackberry to fill in. All right, so that was the basic intro to broom wrench use, but a little dry. So let's see more interesting events. Here's a nice big group of volunteers doing their thing with the broom wrenches. And again, I mentioned the Cub Scouts. They did a great job. You see those kids managed to pull a broom, got the root and everything. So they did a great job. It's another one of our work parties. And, as many of the volunteers often comment, the Hillside Natural Area is just a beautiful place to work. I mean, you can see the backdrop of their view where they're working is, a panoramic bay view. So yes, it can be hard work to pull broom, a little repetitive at times, but some people really enjoy it, find a kind of, meditative aspect to it, and you're out in nature and enjoying, you know, your surroundings. So, I mean, there's not too many places you can do work that look like that. I mean, that's a pretty spectacular view. So, more kids doing a great job. I don't know if they have a OSHA approved technique, but they, you know, make up for what they lack in body mass with ingenuity and how they go after it, and they seem to be doing it safely enough, so they're succeeding. That's great. And yeah, it's just great to see so many young people really engaging and learning about, you know, how to do some stewardship in their, you know, local environment and getting out into the nature and their immediate surroundings. That looks like it's all grass, but that was a broom plant. You can see it a little better once you got it out of the ground. So sometimes this is a large meadow that we were working mostly at the perimeter, but there were, you know, broom popping up in the middle of the grassy areas. So and that's just because of how they spread by seed and everything. That when the seed pods dry up, they actually kind of explode explosively, like a lot of you know, seed pod plants do, and so they can spread quite some distance. All right, so we've talked about big broom and the wrenches, and that's a really important aspect of the broom pulling. But what about the small stuff? And that's a really important thing to keep up with too, because when you pull the big ones, you've got a big seed bank there, and those small ones are going to be coming up, you know, for years afterwards. So as I said, you can pull them by hand, and it goes a lot faster than having to set the broom wrench for each one, as long as you can pull it without, you know, a whole lot of force. And so, you know, it takes a little bit of a different level of attention. I think, you know, people with big broom wrenches kind of get into the very, you know, aggressive, I'm gonna just, you know, yank these things out of the ground phase. But when you're pulling the small stuff, you have to just be a little bit more methodical and go after it. So I wish it went this fast in reality, but that's sped up in the video. All right, so another little time warp video, but I think it's kind of reflective to show how much progress a group can make, you know, working on an area. So, you know, as you can see, I actually just went in, the kids had found a little tunnel and they were excited. So we were working behind this stand of brooms, so that, you know, some of it doesn't look like much is happening, and then it's going to thin out and kind of go away because we were working on it from behind. But every once in a while you'll see something, you know, shake and come down from the backdrop. But there's also people working on the front, and you can just see how, you know, a number of people spread out keep at it, and you can make a lot of progress. Well, one thing is, you'll see, you know, as we take it down, you pile up a lot of material, and so that's another factor to consider. You know, when you're pulling small broom, it's just a little bit of green leafy material, not much dry woody biomass that can, you know, basically decompose in the environment without any major problem. But when you pull so much of this really mature stuff that you're generating a lot of dry biomass, that's, you know, material that should really, you know, be removed for you know, the fire hazard risks. And so it's not the most fun job, but volunteers have been very good at hauling out the large piles of pulled material. We use tarps and multiple people to haul that out. But you know, there's a lot of activity here, and you can start to see that center stand is starting to thin out. You can see that activity behind it. And you know, we did this just in, you know, probably an hour or something. It was a lot of people working together, and it makes for very effective work. Also points out, I think you see people taking breaks, drinking water and changing layers. So like layered clothing is always a good idea. It started out as kind of a foggy morning, but it got warmer, and as you work, you get hot. So it sort of captures the general trend of how things go with a broom pole event. So yeah, we've managed to break through. There's a lot that was cleared on the other side of that, and there's actually a pile back there. But since this work happened, both of those piles have been hauled out, and this area has a good 15 or 20 foot strip along the edge of the meadow. This is the meadow that's just below Madera School. So it's in the newly acquired Madera open space that the city, with the help of trail trekkers raising funds, acquired several years ago. And so there's been a lot of volunteer effort with broom removal in that area for the past few years, and we've made a really noticeable difference. It's a lot better there than it has been. So even with as much seed as these produce, and the need to kind of keep after it for many years to come, you can make a really sizable and notable difference pretty quickly. And it's not really that there aren't other plants in here. When we pull plants in an area like this, we regularly find small little oak seedlings. I mentioned the native blackberry. There's also a lot of coyote bush or baccharis that's mixed in, and you kind of want to know how to identify the difference. It's not too hard once you get used to it, but it's definitely freeing up space for other plants. So this is that same area, and this video just kind of pans back and forth a couple times, and it's showing what it looked like before with a big stand of broom, and then as it pans back, this is what it looked like afterward, after we hauled all those piles out. And there's still a lot of dry material there. A lot of it might still be some dried broom that we should pull out, but it's much cleaner of the living broom, and so it just shows that was probably 2 volunteer parties to get it to this condition. And it's really dramatic. Even if you look now where it pans next to this dead tree, that's a big open area that when it comes back, that was all full of broom basically. So the volunteers really did a great job of building, or taking away this broom in an area that we worked on for a pretty modest amount of time. All right, so I mentioned hauling broom. There's an example of our volunteers loading it onto tarps and hauling it out to the road where the city can pick it up either in a dumpster or piles that are made in an accessible area. The fire department does occasionally do burn piles if it's somewhere that they can access, but they also can't do it in really remote areas because they need to be able to get within 50, 100 feet of a fire truck. So so it does involve a bit of hauling of the material when we generate a lot of that. So I mentioned some of the natives that are mixed in. There's a close-up view of the California blackberry that I mentioned, and you can kind of see how the thorns are different than the Himalayan, which is yet another invasive plant very common in our area, that most people are familiar with when you say blackberry. But this plant is, it's a vine, it's a native, it's a desirable plant, and you just want to, recognize the difference. And you know, it's something that is often found in some of the areas we're working with. The coyote bush in the middle is also fairly common, and it has a very different growing habit than the broom, so it's pretty easy to differentiate. It, you know, tends to kind of branch out more at the base and get wider, whereas the broom is very vertical. And so it's not difficult to tell these apart just from leaf shape and the growing form. But when they get mixed in and you've got dead wood, I mean, the coyote brush leaves some dead material as well, and so when things are in a tangle, you can kind of lose sight of what's what. But it's just a good idea to be able to identify that and know the difference. And I, you know, mentioned there's oak seedlings that often come up around these areas, even though, you know, the broom does a very good job of suppressing the native plants, and it competes very aggressively with them. I mean, it takes water, but it also it actually changes. I mean, it's considered this, you know, ecological disruptor, that it really changes the soil chemistry and nutrients and water cycle, because not only is it using water, but it's a nitrogen fixing plant like other legumes. And so it actually increases the nitrogen levels in the soil, which sounds like a good thing. If you're a gardener, you're always wanting fertility for your vegetable garden or something, but native plants evolved with very low nitrogen soils. So when that kind of nitrogen fertility is introduced to a soil, it's actually kind of a disincentive for the native plants compared to the advantage they would have over other invasives that maybe like that that kind of nitrogen fertility more. So it shifts things in a way that the natives don't necessarily have as much advantage as they would have. And you know, there's just other aspects of structurally changing the habitat to make it less useful for you know, insects, native insects, birds, mammals. That whole food chain and ecosystem is disrupted when the fundamental food plants for that food chain are changed. And that's why it's really important to try to mitigate some of the spread of this invasive plant and support the natives to return. And just the last native I'll mention is poison oak. Obviously, its first order of business is to avoid it as a human, because it's unpleasant for us. But it's also, you know, it's not something to just be flat out eradicated. It's and as volunteers, we don't really deal with it because we don't want anyone to, you know, get exposed. But it's worth recognizing that it has ecosystem values too. It's like as useless as it seems to humans, or as, you know, detrimental as it seems to humans, it actually is used by quite a number of animals in a productive way that you know, we don't usually appreciate just because it's such a nasty plant for us. And just a few more hillside native plants. These aren't the greatest images to stand out, but and these aren't necessarily found right immediately in the areas where we'd be working with broom, but it's, you know, nearby areas, and just to give an appreciation of some of the other interesting native plants that are out there. Some nice flowers, Phacelia blue-eyed grass and Arroyo lupin. The bee plant is great for insects. It makes small red flowers, you can barely see in that photo. And then soap plant was a really important plant for Native Americans, and you'll see it around in the Hillside Natural Area, and was even kind of cultivated and gardened. So you can sometimes see areas where it's, you know, looks like it's a patch that's had been tended. And then this image might be a little bit hard to read, but I've drawn a line here. It's at the edge of this meadow, and there's a difference in the grasses. You can kind of see it in the shade of green, and in the growing habit, it's a little bunchier. So the right-hand side is the native purple needlegrass bunchgrass. It's a perennial grass. And then the left-hand side is dominated by, the annual invasive European oatgrass and things like that are, very prevalent. And it's just interesting to show, what our, grassy meadows should have looked like or might have looked like in the past and what they look like now. And the fact that there's this line at the edge is kind of due to the historical, work or maintenance that was done on this site. To keep the weeds down, they were disking it with a disc towed by a tractor that dug up the soil. And so that obviously is very bad for perennial that leaves its roots in the ground year after year. But the annuals thrive on disruption, so they just come back every year. And because they couldn't get to some of these edge patches or really steep areas, you'll find the remnants of, some of the native bunch grasses in these less accessible areas, and they're still doing quite well, and they will actually outcompete the annual invasive grasses when they've gotten well established like that. So that's a nice reminder that we can have a stable alternative to the annual grasses that require a lot of maintenance, because you have to mow them more because they create so much biomass and fuel each year. And the native grasses, because they have bigger root systems, they tend to get deeper, have more access to water, and actually stay a little greener throughout the year. So all this was, to encourage people not just to learn about broom, but to get out there and help do some of the control. And so I just reiterate the great work that El Cerrito Trail Trekkers does, and thank them for hosting the Hillside Festival for this talk. But they're going to be increasingly in the field with hikes and in-person work parties, and encourage you to participate in those. Likewise, Friends of Five Creeks is a great group doing similar work, and there's also the El Cerrito Green Teams that were mentioned. And so all three of those have websites, and you can sign up for their email newsletters and get notice of events. A lot of times these three groups partner on broom pull type events, but it's worth getting to know these groups better if you don't already, and get their information and participate in some of the future events. So I think that's the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions if anyone's got any they'd like to discuss, or thoughts that they've had from the presentation.
Well, thanks, Howdy. I thought that was a great presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else did. I just want to add one thing. Trail trekkers will lend out our weed pullers if people want to go and work on their own. So if anybody wants to do that, you can borrow them to sign them out. I believe Wade had a question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, pretty simple ones. I was back when you were showing the videos of people pulling stuff up. And you were talking about how much you can accomplish in a fairly short period of time. I was wondering if I could get a sense of scale. So, for example, if you had like a 10 by 10 patch of broom, 100 square feet, and you had a team of 5 people, how long would it take for them to clear that?
Yeah, so not very long, I would say. In fact, most of the time, just to have a little bit more elbow room around using the wrenches, we wouldn't advise 5 people to be working within 10 square feet, because you would just, or I mean 100 square feet, but it's 10 by 10. So that would just be a little crowded and likely to, be knocking into each other. So I would say, more often what we have is maybe, 4 or 5 groups of people each working maybe 100 square foot area. And I'd say in an hour, 1 or 2 people can clear a 10 by 10 area when it's big plants that are, easily pulled by a broom wrench. I mean, you can always get into situations that are more challenging, especially if it's really small stuff or these ones that have been cut off and are hard to grab onto. But yeah, it's actually surprising how much area you can do. And we usually work for maybe 2 to 3 hours at a time, and I would say that easily one person can cover 100 square feet in that time, or maybe less if it's 2 working together. But we generally kind of have people spread out more. So I don't know that I've ever done really rigorous.
No, I was just looking for kind of a general sense of scale. And actually, I think what you said, it's 1 or 2 people could clear 100 square feet in a couple of hours. That's pretty fast.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah. My other question was that it was really kind of fun to watch those kids sort of sitting on the broom puller to get it out. And I was wondering if you happen to know somebody who weighs 99.2 pounds, how hard is it going to be to get that person to be able to pull these out? Are they going to be able to use that broom puller?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, the leverage does a lot of the work for you. And, normally we're working with adults, but we've recently, luckily, been able to work with a bunch of, younger kids. And I was a little bit skeptical going in that, that age range, which I think was maybe in the 8 to 10-year-old range. It seemed like, maybe just on the edge of really being able to do some useful, productive work. But I was really pleasantly surprised by how effective they were. I mean, I think, some of the sitting on the wrenches was just, because they're kids and it's fun and they try to invent, more playful ways to do things. But they had the strength to do it. It's always maybe a matter of just taking on the appropriate size plants too. I mean, there's always a big range of sizes where you are. So you can pick everything from the small stuff, which, doesn't necessarily require less strength. I mean, it can take a bit of hand strength to grip the small plants to pull them by hand easily. So not everyone's going to do that, and maybe there are smaller wrenches that you can do smaller plants with. So yeah, I think there's quite a spectrum of work, and there's a lot of opportunity for people of all different sizes and abilities. And yeah, I was really happy to see how well the kids were doing, and they seemed really engaged and happy doing the work too.
Okay, I think Laura's got a question in the chat, so I'm going to bow out now.
Okay, so I see the question says, when it's hauled away, does it go for composting with the rest of our green waste? And yeah, so that picture you saw of like the dumpster that was full of dried broom, the city has a contract with, I think, it's the same hauler and processor that handles our curbside green waste. Will deliver these big dumpsters that we can fill with green waste, in this case broom, and they will take it to the same composting facility that our curbside broom goes to. So that's what's happening with it. And, you know, that's important because if it's got seed in it, you know, you want it to go to a composting facility that's going to do a hot compost that, you know, will kill the seed. And, you know, I think the commercial composting facilities have a good record of that. I haven't really heard of people having problems with seedlings coming out of their when they, you know, a lot of times the city will have compost giveaways from that source of compost. You can pick it up at the recycling center or something, and you know, I've never heard people having issues with unwanted plants volunteering out of that compost. Whereas when I compost stuff at home, I get volunteers all the time because I'm doing kind of cold composting. It's not getting hot enough to kill the seed, but that's why I'm sort of selective about the types of plants I put in my local compost or at home versus putting in the curbside bins. But
okay, are there any other questions? Well, Howdy, I really think you did a great job. It's inspiring to see all those people at work. Those movies were just great.
yeah, and I need to give credit to Dave, was the cinematographer for many of those movies. He took some of them. So thanks, Dave, for that. And thanks for organizing the Hillside Festival and Broom Polls and all the work you've done to make that happen. So.
Great. Okay, so before closing out, I wanted to thank also the El Cerrito Historical Society, which is letting us use their Zoom account, and John Falconer, who will be facilitating more of these meetings, festival events. So hope to see you all at future festival events. And if there's nobody else who wants to talk, why don't we thank Howdy again and see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're having the bird talk. Okay.